Good afternoon, members. It's already the time to start. We've also formed a quorum. So, any declaration of interest? Is there a need to declare interest? No? Is there anybody who's importing formula into Hong Kong? We don't have babies, but what about grandchildren? No. You can still declare your interest later on. Nominations for chairmanship. Nominations, please. Mr. Wong Ting-kwong. Mr. Wong, do you accept the nomination? Any seconders? Mr. W.K. Low, seconds. Do we have a second nomination? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? No? Then Mr. Wong, please come forward and congratulations. Thank you. Do we need to elect a deputy chairman? If there's no need for a deputy chair, then we can move on to the following item. I have received from Mr. Dennis Kwok a letter. He would like to, before the deadline, or rather, he has written to us saying that he would like to join the subcommittee, and that was after the deadline at midnight of the 5th of March. Any comments? No. Then his application for membership will be accepted. According to the agenda, for the Import and Export General Amendment Regulation 2013, I would like to give the floor to the administration and walk us through the paper. In attendance, we have the Secretary for Food and Health, Mr. Dr. Koh, and Mrs. Miriam Lai from the Food and Health Bureau. He's the Permanent Secretary. Mr. Philip Chen, Deputy Secretary for Food and Health. Mr. Brian Low, Deputy Director General of Trade and Industry. And Mr. Yu Kun Hing, Assistant Commissioner for Customs and Excise. Ms. Leonora Yip, Senior Assistant Law Draftsman, Department of Justice, and Mr. Peter C., Senior Government Counsel, Department of Justice. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Koh. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At various retail points, we've noted a shortage of powdered formula for infants and young children. The government's judgment was that such a phenomenon was related to parallel trading activities. Relatively speaking, a large amount of such powdered formula has been diverted from the supply chain in Hong Kong. In the first 2 or 3 weeks of this incident, our principle was that, after all, it was an activity in the market, and that's why we have worked with the supply side. First of all, we would like to make sure that the total supply of powdered formula in Hong Kong would be adequate. And then, secondly, at the retail level, should any particular retail outlets suffered from shortage, we try to see if the stock could be replenished ASAP. And then there were some reports saying that certain sales tactics were problematic, accusing them of tying in with the parallel trading activities. We studied the matter, and in fact, over that period of time, we had 3 or 4 meetings with the suppliers as well as the retailers. However, despite, first of all, all suppliers assured us that the overall supply in the Hong Kong market was adequate, and in fact they had already taken into account the non-local demand and the trend. And in fact, prior to the Chinese New Year, they had expected a fluctuation, but still they were of the opinion that the supply would be adequate, and they had also assured us that they would replenish the stock at the retail level as quickly as possible. They had also put in place hotlines for the placing of orders. We tried to ask them to fine-tune the arrangements as much as possible. There were certain reports saying that sometimes the retail tactics may be problematic, and the suppliers had agreed and assured us that certain measures would be taken, and they would be in the nature of business practices, like warning, limited supply, or suspension of supply. Despite the adoption of such measures, over the period of 3 weeks' time, the situation did not see any improvement. And in fact, the shortage spread from Yuen Long and North District over to the Hong Kong Island, and the hotline for placing orders could not be reached, and parallel trading activities per se would not be a breach of the law, but then the scale was such that a large amount of powdered formula has been diverted from Hong Kong, and so it resulted in a failure of the supply chain. Therefore, on the 1st of March 2013, we introduced a number of measures, or rather on the 1st of February, we introduced a number of measures. Like at the control points, we introduced a number of measures to strike a blow against the parallel trading activities. And the Rail Corporation also tightened up the restrictions. The administration also put in place a 24-hour hotline so as to make sure that consumers could reach the suppliers via the hotlines. For a period of time, they were found to be effective to a certain extent. However, we foresaw that post-Chinese New Year, parallel trading activities would resume. Therefore, for the medium and longer term, the administration felt that it was necessary to resort to other measures. Therefore, we decided that the Import and Export Ordinance should be amended so as to impose a restriction. In the gist, it means that powdered formula for infants and children under 36 months would be subject to an export restriction. But then for those in the trade of re-export, such businessmen could apply for an export license so as to export the powdered formula. And bear in mind that sometimes local parents may have to take their infants and young children on a trip overseas, and they have the need to carry powdered formula with them. So we're saying that over a 24-hour period of time, you cannot bring with you more than 2 cans of powdered formula measuring 1.8 kilograms. The Executive Council went through the legislative exercise, and the regulation came into effect on the 1st of March. We did prosecute certain offenders since, and at the retail outlets, it seems that the supply is steady, and so far we haven't received any reports about serious shortage. Parallel trading activities have subsided when compared with the past. When it comes to law enforcement, the CNE has found that individuals, including parallel traders, continue to bring powdered formula with them. If they exceed the limit, they will be prosecuted. Some of them may not have exceeded the limit, but then they have been doing so within 24 hours time, so it is again a breach of the law. Now we're presenting this regulation amendment to you. We hope we have your support, and I hope that both the local residents and the mainlanders would understand that this is a measure that we think we can't help to avoid. And in the beginning, we tried to solve the problem on the supply side, and we try to cooperate very closely with the wholesalers and the retailers. They've been doing their best to tie in with our efforts. But still, the effect was such that the problem did not go away in those 3 weeks' time. The problem was aggravated, and that's why we have to resort to this measure reluctantly. Well, we bear in mind that local parents need the powdered formula for personal use, and so we believe that the 2 tin or 2 can limit should be able to meet the needs of local parents who would like to take their babies or young children on a trip overseas. I hope we have your understanding, and we hope that you will support this amendment exercise. I'll pause here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those members who would like to raise questions with the administration, I think there is a large number of you. If I may just call out your names. The order is such that Wang Kwok-hing, Alan Leung, Dr. Wong, Dennis Kwok, Andrew Ng, Zhong Zhigan, Zhong Kwok-ban, Sin Chung-kai, Leung Chi-cheng, James To, Alice Mack, Fan Kok-wai, Ho Jun-yin, and Lo Wai-kwok, and then Kwok Wai-keung. I think since so many members have indicated they wish to ask questions, so I'll impose a time limit of 5 minutes each for both questions and answers. First, Mr. Wang Kwok-hing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the administration has reluctantly adopted such a decisive move, so that on the 1st of March, we have been imposing a 2 can limit on powdered formula when it comes to the export of such goods. The FTU thinks that it is understandable and it is also desirable. In fact, in the past, the supply has been boosted, but still we were not able to safeguard the local parents and children as far as their need for the powdered formula was concerned. Therefore, for the administration to undertake such a measure, I think it is but necessary, and it also safeguards the interests of the local babies, so it should have our support. Some have suggested that perhaps we should have a sunset clause, but I don't think this is good, because who has a crystal ball who can tell when the sun will set? I think no one can tell when we are going to have a solution once and for all. And I think the government should review the regulation in due course, say for example after a year or after 2 years' time, post-implementation. I hope the administration will respond to this suggestion. That is, will there be a regular review, say once a year? This is my first question.
Secondly, the administration is going at this at full steam, but then Chongqing Street is still rife with transactions many people are still doing parallel trading on powdered formula. Is that the case? Can I ask the administration to let us know what is happening? Is it that there are no measures taken at Chongyang Street? Other border checkpoints are being regulated now, but does it mean that parallel trading on powdered formula has gone to Chongyang Street? Number 3, I have seen from the media that people who broke the law were mainlanders, and they got to know the new regulation only at the boundary checkpoint. Would the administration step up publicity so as to alert them to the new regulation, especially if they commit an offense? I know that they have been retained before trial took place. Is that necessary? Well, certainly, if they commit an offense, they should be tried at the court. But is it necessary for them to be retained in custody for a few days? It's just like imprisoning them. Why didn't you allow them to be on bail? You just have to get hold of the traveling document and they cannot leave Hong Kong. So why do you want to incarcerate them? Thank you for those questions. First, I agree personally that to include a sunset clause now would be inappropriate. We, of course, will be doing a lot with the importers and retailers to try to improve and perfect the supply chain. However, this is a question that has to be taken care of from both sides. In other words, if parallel trading becomes rampant again after the regulation is scrapped, now what will be the demand from the mainland? I mean, all these cannot be controlled by us because there are factors outside our control. Therefore, to set a sunset clause at any particular point in time would see my reservation. As for the time for review, now on the one hand, we'll do a lot with the suppliers and retailers in order to set up systems so that at a certain stage, the administration would feel reassured that even if there is no regulation, the supply would be guaranteed for local mothers. Again, there are factors outside our control. It's very difficult for me really to put my finger on a certain time frame. This has a lot to do with demand. So I would rather do this, that we put this under regular review. In fact, we are going to review it from time to time. The Legislative Council can also ask us to give you reports at certain intervals. This is certainly what I like to do. And secondly, I would also ask Mr. Yu to let you know more about Chongyang Street. And then the first part of the third question, I agree that we should step up with publicity. Maybe not at the boundary checkpoints, but before people get to the customs clearance stations at the boundary checkpoint. And enforcement-wise, I would again defer to Mr. Yu. Mr. Yu, please. Chongyang Street. It is a rather unique place. People need to get special permission to go there unless you work or live there. On Shenzhen side, their control is a little different from that of Hong Kong. All along the Hong Kong Customs and Excise Department, together with the police and also customs departments of the mainland, we are working very closely indeed. In order to complement this new regulation against export of powdered formula, before the regulation came into place, we had already sat down with the North District Council, the area committees, and also the relevant chambers of commerce. We have secured the support. Starting from the 1st of March, the shops on the Hong Kong side of Chongyang Street are not selling powdered formula. They have also posted up the posters we gave them and remind people of the export control. And also starting from not hour on the 1st of March, no more baby formula were taken to the shops on the Hong Kong side of Chung Ying Street. But as you know, on the other side of Chung Ying Street, there are shops of the mainland, and in those shops, there are still supplies of powdered formula. So when people say they can get hold of such goods on Chung Ying Street, it is because they have got them from the mainland shops. And as to people arrested for the offense, it depends on the nature of the case in order for us to decide whether people should be held in custody or be released on bail, etc. As for the 3 cases in question, it is because on that day, after the cases were processed, it was already very late, and that actually the 3 persons did not want to be bailed because it was very late, and actually their cases would be brought to court the next morning. And then after court proceedings were held, it was the decision of the court that they should be retained in custody pending sentencing. So that was the decision of the court. Mr. Alan Leong, on behalf of the Civic Party, I'd like to say that at this stage, we are inclined to support the Import and Export General Amendment Regulation 2013. This is mainly because we like to give priority to Hong Kong people and to make sure that there is baby formula for Hong Kong babies and young children. Under that consideration and on that basis, we are inclined to support the regulation. We are aware that in an open forum, the Secretary for Food and Health has said that we have to move fast because this is an urgent matter. We agree. However, you may want to buy time, but after you have got the time in your hands, how are you going to make use of the time you have? Just now, when the Secretary answered Mr. Wong Kwok Heng, he said that a lot of things cannot be predicted and are outside our control, etc. Mr. Secretary, can I ask you this? Now that you have got time in your hand, if the LegCo supports the amendment regulation, what are you going to do in the interim? Will you ensure that baby formula for Hong Kong infants and children would continuously be supplied, or at the same time you would also ensure that the demand from the mainland can be met by baby formula producers on the mainland because they have to win the confidence of mainland consumers? In other words, how are you going to interact with the mainland in the interim? As to whether you call it a sunset clause, well, Chairman, we understand what it means. It means that we set a date for the regulation to expire to make sure that the administration would revert to the LegCo. Well, it depends whether the Secretary will give us a clear reply, and I can give you a forewarning that actually this time around, before the Legislative Council had a chance to vet the regulation, it had already come into effect. So, Secretary, I would like you to explain the matter, because it's really exceptional. If you choose to do this all the time, if this will be abused by C.Y. Leung, it is going to be a major issue, and this time around, the penalty can be imprisonment, but then the LegCo has not even studied the regulation, and yet you can allow people to be retained and imprisoned. This will be followed up by Mr. Dennis Kwok. But then, Secretary, you have to answer my first question, and that is, what are you going to do with the time you have bought? Secretary. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Leong. In the interim, we'll continue to liaise with suppliers and retailers. In fact, we have never stopped our liaison with them. In the time to come, to be more constructive, on the one hand, I would make sure that the overall supply for Hong Kong will be adequate, and then we have to do more with regard to the supply chain or retail level. In the last few months, we were not able to thwart the activities of parallel traders. First of all, the order placing hotline. Theoretically, if there is a hotline for the placing of orders, so that local parents can systematically place orders for baby formula, then it should in fact be a great help. But then in the past few weeks we saw this major weakness, and that is the hotlines were not efficient. There were so many complaints that the lines were jammed. I can say that after the 1st of March, the overall situation improved, but even with the government hotline, we still get orders from the public. In other words, people are still preferring the government hotline to the suppliers' hotline. In other words, the suppliers' hotlines are not efficient. In fact, we should ask them to boost the manpower and also training of operators for the hotlines. Second, a supply chain at the retail level, and that is the restocking arrangement. It depends on whether the suppliers would like to boost the fleet so that there would be more trucks taking stocks to the retailers. Number 3, we like to see this happen, and that is at certain retail spots. Retailers are already cooperating with suppliers, whereby parents can place orders at retail spots, even on a long-term basis. If this can be done, we can systematize this situation. Say if 1,000 of the 2,000 retail spots can peg with suppliers, then I would have to assess again whether I am totally confident. Next, Dr. Helena Wong. Thank you, Chairman. The DP supports the taking of all effective measures by the administration to tackle this problem of Hong Kong parents not being able to get baby formula for their infants and young children. But the Secretary has to come clean on one point, and that is, after you have this amendment regulation, as has been asked just now, if this will not be made a standing measure, then either we go for a sunset clause so the regulation will expire, or if we don't go for the sunset clause, can the administration promise that at every 3 to 6 months you can give a report to the Legislative Council on the sale of baby formula? You have said that extraordinary measures have been taken to tackle this extraordinary situation, and we don't want to see you sit idle after you have this regulation passed by us. Last time when we met with the baby formula suppliers and retailers, we saw that there were a lot of problems. Some brands have said that the supply has always been sufficient. However, that is not what we see operationally. Secondly, on the retail level, there is this kind of bundled sale. We have heard such malpractices. Even if you have the amendment regulation, these problems are not going to go away. And this can happen with other commodities. If we allow you to go ahead with this amendment regulation, can you promise at what intervals you will conduct your review, and when will you think we do not need this regulation anymore? And that is, what do you have to see as a kind of phenomenon before you will say that this regulation is no longer needed? Secretary, thank you, Dr. Wong. Indeed, there are many things to follow up with. As you said, some of the problems are still unresolved. Why is it that some brands have said that they could open up their warehouse for you to see that the supply is sufficient? Then why still there is a retail problem? And perhaps we need more cooperation from them. And I hope you will understand that when the administration intervenes into such matters, some commercial organizations may feel that the information is commercially sensitive and might not want to divulge it. So when the administration talks to them, well, if it is just the mechanism, it's all right, of course. But if we want to understand more, we need to get data, then it's up to their judgment whether they would like to release the information.
You talked about the bundled sale. Well, the supplier and the distributor as well as the retailer had a particular relationship. When there was this accusation of bundled sale, all the major suppliers denied resorting to bundled sale. But some retailers pledged that it was indeed the case. Well, I think it is more constructive to focus on the following. That is, we have to make sure that at the retail level, the stock can be replenished as soon as possible. It means that they have to invest in the vehicle fleet. They have to get more people to deliver, and they need to have more people manning the hotline, and they have to train their staff. Of course, another point is that you may need more manpower during the peak period, while during the ordinary period you don't need that much. So we have to follow this up with them. As to the willingness of the retailers, maybe a retailer can say that I'm happy to take orders from consumers and I can pledge to deliver the goods within a certain period of time so the consumers don't have to call up the suppliers every time. I hope to see this happening. And then, as to setting a deadline for the operation of the regulation, that is a sunset clause, or setting a timetable for review, I'm afraid at this moment I can't promise anything. I don't know when it should be reviewed, but if the LegCo is to ask us to come back regularly, I find no problem. However, if it is too frequent, we may not be able to report much progress in the interim. Next, Mr. Dennis Kwok. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the Bureau to amend the regulation in this way, I think the government is breaching the usual practice. Even for negative vetting, the LegCo will be given sufficient time to scrutinize the amendment, 28 days plus 21 days. In the past, in the year 2005, when we had to deal with the question of Malacca Green, and then on another occasion, we had to deal with the contaminated formula. On both occasions, the government had to justify the urgency. I think it is no exception this time, so I hope that the SFH will justify why he has departed from the convention. And I think the government must make sure that it will honor its pledge, that is, such an approach would only be resorted to in very urgent situations. Because after all, we are talking about criminal liability, and we have the duty to safeguard the conventions. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your question. At the beginning of January up to Chinese New Year, over those few weeks, things developed very rapidly. This is because in a short span of 3 weeks' time, parallel traders grabbing or buying up powdered formula took place in Yuen Long, and then Fanning, Shangshui Taipo, and then Kowloon City Center, and then before we announced a basket of measures, that is before February, the activities spread to Hong Kong Island. But meanwhile, we were already working on it actively. In other words, It wasn't a matter of we did nothing. In fact, there were 3 or 4 meetings between the administration and the suppliers. They themselves also worked on it, like assuring the Hong Kong community. Sometimes when there's a run on a particular item, it's a matter of confidence. Some may claim that they have got millions of cans of powdered milk, so they would sort of open the doors of the storage to assure everybody. And then the supply chain. Continuously, it was said that prices were raised and the parallel traders were trying to fight for the powdered formula. We also urged the suppliers to improve the hotline. But despite their promises to do so, more and more people were complaining that they couldn't get through the line. So it became very critical. So though Mr. Kwok was talking about this piece of subsidiary legislation, I was just now talking about a basket of measures. We tried to do something ASAP, and in fact we were criticized for making it effective only on the 1st of March. In fact, we had wanted to do it even much more quickly. We knew that post-Chinese New Year, parallel trading would resume. As to why we couldn't have introduced it on the 14th or the 15th day of the Lunar New Year, this is because we had to establish an application system for the export licenses so that the legitimate business of importing the powdered formula for re-export could be permitted. So the suppliers and the transshipment traders talked to us, and we tried to understand the mechanism, and we set up a system to allow them to apply for an export license, and that's why the effective date was made 1st of March. At that time, we had tried to introduce it even more quickly, and of course the mood now is different. At that time, there were accusations that we acted too late. Next, Ms. Ann Zhang. A number of DAB members on Wednesday this week, in the light of this meeting, went to the local customs in Shenzhen to understand the development. We understand that in 2010, the Legislative Council already started to pay attention to this question of powdered formula. But so far, we didn't have any results, and now we are presented with this extra draconian rule. Yes, it is a very harsh rule, but it shows that it is working. On Wednesday, as far as powdered formula was concerned, there wasn't any sort of trading, but parallel trading of other items was very buoyant. So it's a question more for the CNE than the SHF. The other day, when we came back from Shenzhen via Lowu, when we entered Hong Kong, we found that for the railway station concourse, we found that we had a lot of advertisements for powdered formula. But no one approached the visitors to warn them of the 2-can limit. Yes, there were certain posters, but then the posters were sort of blocked by the omnipresent advertisements on powdered formula. Now, you may think that a fine of a few $1,000s isn't a big thing, but still, it may not be regarded as fair. Now, I come to my question for the CNE. As I have said, there were lots of parallel trading activities, electronic products, tablets, vitamin pills, and diapers. And according to Shenzhen Customs, we were told that 700 baskets of parallelly traded goods were seized. So please comment on this. And then there were accusations that our measure would affect the normal, legitimate business of importing and exporting goods. What do you say about that? Mr. Kun. Thank you, Ms. Ann Jiang, for this question. We were aware of the impact, and so we have started a comprehensive publicity drive, posters, APIs, and then in Shanghai and Fanling, we gave out leaflets to the dispensaries, and we also gave out the leaflets to the visitors at the various boundary crossing. As to the cases exposed, once again, we have been distributing leaflets. That is, for those making multiple trips within 24 hours, they will still be subject to the rule. For parallel goods, in fact, the Shenzhen Customs has been very concerned about it. We have a joint operation against parallel trading of daily commodities, and the operation was found to be effective. On the Hong Kong side, between 7th of September and 28th of February, there were over 4,000 cases. And then we seized goods up to $30.7 billion. 241 mainlanders were arrested, and 4,000 Hong Kong citizens were arrested. We have dried seafood, food items, watches, electronic goods, and cigarettes being seized. We have the understanding that Shenzhen has stepped up their inspection. 210,000 cases were set up, and 5,885 were criminal in nature because of the larger value. And over 20,000 cases resulted in payment of tax on the spot. And then some of the goods were seized, and then 100,000 cases were referred to other departments. And then since the 1st of February, as a result of the problems in the supply chain for powdered formula, the customs on both sides have decided to have a task group to deal with the parallel trading of daily commodities, including powdered formula. Between the 1st of February and 28th of February, that is before the regulation came into operation, at the border, crossing points, when we saw large quantities of powdered formula being taken across the boundary, we alerted Shenzhen, and they had dealt with 5,800 cases, and 55,000 kgs formula have been seized. So exchange of intelligence have become something regular, and our Assistant Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner of Shenzhen have a regular liaison channel. And in fact, there is a contact point so that if necessary, we can mobilize the frontline staff to deal with the situation immediately. Mr. Low, would you like to comment on the possible impact on legitimate business? Mr. Chairman, since the introduction of the export license requirement for powdered formula, there were certain comments as to whether that would affect Hong Kong's status as a free port and free trading. I want to take this opportunity to say that the status of a free port doesn't mean that there is the absence of all sorts of export control. The two are not the same. In fact, all around the world, in the light of local circumstances and needs, certain goods would be brought under import and export control, provided that the rationale is acceptable, and that there's a good reason to do so.
In fact, Hong Kong also puts export and import control on certain commodities for a good reason, maybe for food security, for environment protection, etc. So this time around, if there is an export control or the requirement for an export license on powdered formula, as long as there is a good policy objective, then it will not affect Hong Kong's status as a free port. Mr. Christopher Chung. Chairman, I am still not happy with the explanation because Article 115 of the Basic Law says the Hong Kong SAR shall pursue the policy of free trade and safeguard the free movement of goods, intangible assets and capital. You gave us a very short explanation. I need more details. Once there is a problem, you would put export control or import control on certain commodities. What if there are problems with other commodities? How can Hong Kong pursue the policy of free trade? In these few days, a lot of views have come up. Some of them are attacks, saying that what Hong Kong is doing amounts to an embargo of export to China or the mainland. This is a very serious accusation. Can you explain it? And what if we don't go ahead with the regulation and we just rely on the mainland customs to strictly control import, because this is going to deal a blow on their economy? Maybe we can rely on the mainland side to enforce the law so that you can achieve the same effect. You don't need this regulation, right? Dr. Ko, thank you for that question. Actually, there are different concepts at play. First, as the Director General had explained, according to the WTO, there are some principles, and in fact there are exceptions to those principles. And if there is a reasonable explanation and a reasonable concern, there is an exception on placing export prohibitions or restrictions temporarily. I believe you can understand that this is the major principle, and under any major principle there can be exceptions. As long as there are reasonable explanations, then the principle itself is not affected. But Mr. Christopher Chung mentioned the basic law, and this has become a legal issue. If you mention the basic law talks about free trade, but if this is a legal question, then perhaps I can defer to Ms. Ip to give you an explanation. Thank you, Chairman. We have investigated in depth into this issue. We think we still comply with the basic law. Yes, Article 115 talks about the policy of free trade. That is the basic principle. In our laws, they don't say that we cannot place any restrictions on import or export. Even if we amend Cap 60A today, we are just adding one entry into a schedule. In fact, there are other commodities which have already been placed under export control. The DOJ is of the view that there is no contradiction with the basic law. Dr. Ko, whether you mention the basic law or the WTO agreement, they are just general principles. The general principle is free trade. The basic law says we should pursue the policy of free trade. But given the nature of this exercise, I don't want you to mix this up with other commodities. The health authorities in Hong Kong believe that we should publicize the advantages and merits of breastfeeding. However, there are infants or young children just cannot use their mother's milk in order to wholly meet their nutritional needs, especially when they are from 0 to 6 months, and maybe for good reasons. And that is why the supply of powdered formula would be regarded as the main supply of nutritional requirements. And to some people, this is a necessity, a crucial kind of food. And that is why we can reasonably explain that under the major principle, we can have this as an exception. What is more important is that if this is a crucial diet and the only food in some situations, you do not have to worry that we will lightly extend this to other commodities. I hope you understand that point. Mrs. Lai? Sorry, her mic is not on. Thank you. As to whether this regulation contravenes the basic law, apart from what Ms. Ip and the Secretary said, I'd like to supplement that any regulation has to be tested against a principle, and that is fairness, reasonableness, and proportionality. What we are trying to control is baby formula for infant and young children under 36 months of age. Other powdered formula, maybe for elderly people, for pregnant women, they are not put under control. This is the first point. Secondly, even for infant and young children between 0 to 36 months, we are not saying that they cannot be exported. We are just putting on a restriction on the export, and that is we allow 1.8 kg for personal use. We believe that this is legitimate and reasonable because we can meet the requirements of the people, and also because of the serious shortage during Lunar New Year, our legal experts have looked at the situation, and their professional judgment is that the regulation is not against the basic law. Thank you. Mr. Chung Kwok-pun. Thank you, Chairman. Basically, I think the regulation only tackles the symptoms but not the root of the problem. As the Secretary said, supply is sufficient. Some media have said that Hong Kong imported 40 million cartons last year, but we only needed 30 million cartons locally. And Dr. Koh has already said that this might have something to do with the supply chain. If that's the case, it's easy to resolve it. It depends how hard you work at it. The impression is just about 1 or 2 brands, 1 or 2 suppliers, and also only baby formula for infants from 0 to 6 months, which are the problem. But it seems this has upset the entire supply system and has subject the law to mockery. Now, if this is a commercial act, if this is commercial behavior, then I don't understand why the SARG has suddenly turned to legislation to tackle a supply chain problem. You talk about hotlines. You look at other hotlines for takeaway commodities. For example, door-to-door service for the delivery of pizzas within half an hour. I think it's so easy if you want to do something about it. But in the end, you are going down the route of legislative control. I don't think you should allow a few suppliers to wreak havoc of the entire situation. And as Mr. Christopher Chung said, today you may have a problem with baby formula. What about diapers tomorrow? And what about a particular drug the day after tomorrow? China is a big market, but Hong Kong is a small place. And because of different tariff areas that we are in, if there is a big demand from the mainland for a certain commodity in Hong Kong, we just cannot compete with them. I'm sure everything would be swept clean. So how can you always put restrictions? First of all, you have to look at supply, and secondly, you have to work together with the mainland customs. Only the mainland customs can put a stop to such acts, so that we will not be affected by serious parallel trading activities. As Ms. N. Chang was saying, this may be drugs, electronic products, and other commodities. Anything you name. So why don't you really go to the root of the problem and allow those who can really control the situation to do something? Because today you have baby formula, tomorrow it may be a problem with diapers. Plus, the Secretary said that because this is a necessary commodity, this is a critical commodity. Certainly, we want baby nursing parents to be able to get food for their babies. But as the Secretary said, you have said that the supply has never been lacking. Now, if you say there is adequate supply of a critical product, then while we pursue free trade, what are you saying now? If there is a shortage of a critical product, then I can understand. But you have said that there is adequate supply of this critical product, and it's just a problem with the supply chain. Last but not least, at the exit points, this is just called powdered formula. But as you know, we are really talking about baby formula. Baby formula for babies and infants under 36 months of age. Now, if people see this term, powdered formula, what does it mean? Apart from baby formula, what other formulae are you talking about? And I can see another loophole. You talk about 36 months and less. You put a control on that. Now, what if a supplier uses a can with the label of formula for pregnant women, but inside they have filled the can with baby formula? What are you going to do? I think you have rushed into putting forward this regulation, so the Liberal Party will not support you. Dr. Koh, thank you. Now, why is it that one or two suppliers can upset the entire situation? In this event, we can see that a lot of the media reports have concentrated on one or two suppliers. But then, reports we have received showed that at different stages, there could be a third or fourth brand that were involved. If we only take action to tackle one or two brands, there may be technical problems, first of all, and secondly, the problem will spread to other brands. In fact, there are reports saying that other brands are already being very much sought after. Secondly, why is it that we need to go down the legislative route to tackle a commercial act, even if this is a critical commodity? Well, I agree with Mr. Chung that we have always said that this is commercial behavior and is a problem with the supply chain. But all in all, the SALG must make sure that babies and infants in Hong Kong have food, even if it is commercial behavior. However, if that commercial behavior would affect children and babies in Hong Kong, I don't think the Hong Kong public will allow the SALG to sit there idle. And in fact, in those 2 to 3 weeks, you could see that we have done a lot. And yet, the situation continued. So I hope you understand that this is really something not of our own free choice. Earlier on, there were reports that people might foul up the situation by filling different kinds of cans with baby formula. Well, yes, this can certainly be done, but then this is not advantageous to the parallel traders, because after all, the mainland market would like to have commodities packaged in Hong Kong, because part of the problem is confidence. They need unopened cans, and I had reports saying that the label must be in traditional Chinese characters and not simplified Chinese characters. So if you unseal the box, if you open the can, people will not have it anymore. They will not want it anymore. And as to the term powdered formula, especially in Chinese Pui Fong Fen, I like to give the opportunity to the PS to explain why this term is preferred. Oh, yes, I am aware of this as well. I think I can understand the English term, but when I first saw the Chinese term at the customs checkpoint on a poster, I was scratching my head. Allow me to explain this. When we deliberated on the legal terms, we did a lot together with the Center for Food Safety and food experts and also the DOJ. We really had a lot of discussion before we settled on a term. What we are talking about is powdered milk or milk-like substance. Now, milk should be from animals, for example, cows. However, some milk may not come from animals, but from soya beans, for example. So if we are talking about milk from cows or plants, now if it is in powdered form, if it is an orange powder and if water is added to it, it becomes orange juice, then that would not be included. Next member, Sin Chung Kai.
I hope I didn't get it wrong. I think the Secretary talked about this being a long-term measure. He said so in his introductory remarks. Now, we're talking about several tens of millions of babies being born every year, and they will still be interested in buying powdered formula as they need to be fed. Yes, what you're proposing is in line with the basic law. But strictly speaking, if you do it right, it is a business opportunity. If we can set the supply chain right and smoothly, then I think it is a business opportunity. If I may ask Mr. Yu this question, he gave a set of figures. I'm interested. Well, for the parallel traders, you said that 4,000 were Hong Kongers, a few hundred were mainlanders. Correct me if I'm wrong in relation to the figures, and please also supplement the information in writing. What offense, what charge did you bring against them for the Hong Kongers in Hong Kong, except with this import and export regulation? Otherwise, even if a Hong Konger was to bring with him a few more Apple computers or a few more watches, Hong Kong customs could do nothing about him. For the mainland customs, yes, he might be in trouble. So please tell us exactly which offense have they committed. And for the 4,000 who have been arrested, did you bring any prosecution against them? Mr. Yu, if I may explain it once more. For the joint operation, well, for the figure I cited in relation to Hong Kongers, it's about import. At the import hall, we caught them. For the mainlanders who are parallel traders, and even for Hong Kongers who are parallel traders, they maximize each and every trip so as to gain financially. When they come into Hong Kong, they bring with them cigarettes and alcohol. In Hong Kong, they are dutiable commodities. So when they enter Hong Kong, they will be breaching the law of Hong Kong. So the 4,000 plus Hong Kongers, they're mainly accused of bringing in duty not paid cigarettes and alcohol. And for the other direction, electronic products, iPhones and iPads, that is, products are subject to payment of duty. So we can alert them, saying that we have got travelers bringing in such products. So the mainland custom officers will arrest the Hong Kongers for failing to declare. Yes, for parallel trading. So strictly speaking, for the 4,000 plus Hong Kongers, they're mainly for breaching the rules concerning cigarettes and alcohol. Yes, sometimes drugs. But for parallel traders, few of them would do so. But for our joint operation, we also step up our import control. They also step up their import control. So when people go out, we watch out for intelligence and we alert them. And so it will be effective. In other words, by doing it jointly, we can tackle the problems of parallel trading. Thank you, Mr. Yu. Now, if I may follow up on the Secretary's point, the Democratic Party would support this legislative move, but we don't really want it to become something which is long-term. In particular, if we can have a smooth functioning of the supply chain Of course, as I have said in the beginning, it will take a long time, and it will be a difficult task to convince the mainland parents to have confidence in the mainland produced powdered formula. In Hong Kong, in a year or two's time, can you not make sure that the supply chain is working properly? If many people are interested in buying powdered formula in Hong Kong, make sure that there is an adequate supply. Well, for mainlanders who don't have confidence in the powdered formula on the mainland, they come here, they want to buy the powdered formula because they want to be assured. Secretary, we have talked to the suppliers and the retailers. The overall supply, the order placing hotline, restocking, and also long-term or standing arrangement for placing orders at the retail level. All such measures have been considered by us. For the mainland, I think that's beyond our law enforcement. But still, we have a lot of exchanges, and we hope that we can enhance food safety on either side of the boundary. Next, Mr. Leung. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this regulation to come into effect. Indeed, it has gone to solve the problem. At least we won't have local babies running out of powdered formula. So we will support the regulation. However, it appears to me that it looks odd, not just in the eyes of the Hong Kong people, thinking that it would jeopardize our free trade, but even the mainlanders and the mainland media are criticizing us for being stupid because we are giving up the business opportunities. Of course, when we are in a crisis, it's better to safeguard the survival of our own babies, and we can afford to let the business opportunities slip. But we do honor free trade. This is our policy. However, it seems that we have been going overboard in this matter. The Secretary has been reviewing the matter with the suppliers, but it seems that you are not able to resolve the matter just by talking. So perhaps there's something wrong in the supply chain concerning the retailers. I think they're unscrupulous. They know very well that there isn't an adequate supply for the local babies, and they're still raising the prices so as to sell to the parallel traders. And so we have no choice but resort to this measure. Now, there is this consequence, that is, this is being done at the expense of the reputation of Hong Kong. Now, in Macau, again, they are suffering from the same impact, but then they have made arrangements so that they have powdered formula coupons. Can we not do the same? So that we can find a way to safeguard the interests of the local babies. In this way, we can avoid being criticized for being a stupid government, and we don't have to give up the business opportunities. It is said that it is a golden opportunity to do business. It is said that it should only be a short-term measure. I think it is self-contradictory. On the one hand, we want to do business. On the other hand, we want to safeguard the interests of local babies. So, question for the Secretary. Are there any other alternatives than this piece of amendment regulation? I think ultimately the question lies with the suppliers, the retailers. So is there an alternative? Secretary, I'd like to thank Mr. Leung for his question. To a certain extent, I would understand why you describe it as being self-contradictory. I think at the retail level, the supply chain has to work properly. And of course, there are certain management issues and commercial considerations, but it is also a matter of regulatory control. Certain business practices may not be that desirable. It has been found. We have over almost 2,000 retail outlets. So for us to regularize activities which strictly speaking are not a breach of the law, will take time. As to whether we have considered making sure that there is an adequate supply, indeed we have considered it. Like the model of Macau. We're glad to see that Macau has resolved their problem, but our judgment is that the scale of such activities in Hong Kong is different. The scale of such activities is much larger, and for the number of babies in Hong Kong, the number of local parents in Hong Kong, again, that's different from Macau. If we ask all the parents to go through certain procedures, having to queue up, get a registration card, etc., I am not sure whether everybody in Hong Kong will find this acceptable. We have also considered other more innovative measures, like whether we have special outlets so that Hong Kong parents have to produce the birth certificates of the babies before they can buy the powdered formula. But then how many such outlets have to be set up before we can satisfy the demand? There would be queues. And then parallel traders can also get someone to cooperate with them. They just queue up again and again, and then they buy the formula products, and then they resell it to parallel traders around the corner. So it will give rise to further chaos. We haven't been able to We haven't been able to find other solutions. Order placing hotline, restocking, retail arrangements. For the last one, I hope we can sort of regularize it. In overseas countries, the retailers exercise self-discipline. Say, for example, whenever there's a run on certain products, then they will voluntarily put up a sign to say that each customer would be given a particular quota. We will also try to see if the retailers can provide and can make an arrangement to allow for a standing arrangement to place orders for the powdered formula. James To, I think there is a need for such a piece of regulation, but the government should make sure that babies will be given a sufficient supply by having an order placing arrangement. Once everything has become regularized, then the unnecessary moves should be sort of removed. I was late for 5 minutes. I didn't know whether you have discussed about the need to have a public hearing. This will be discussed under the second item of the agenda. Very good, Mr. Chairman. In this case, let me ask the administration a broad issue in terms of the policies. If we have an order placing mechanism so that local parents can have an adequate supply, then do we have a new policy? Do we have a policy to say that despite that others cannot export powdered formula outside of Hong Kong? Well, Mr. James To has certainly raised this point with us concerning a order placing mechanism at the retail level. But we can't use it as a stopgap measure because it is going to be voluntary. If it is voluntary, then it means that no one can be forced to follow suit in the short term. I can't make sure that everybody would do so. Order placing hotline, restocking, and standing arrangements for long-term ordering. If one day we find that we are assured by adopting the 3 arrangements, and in fact, ultimately our purpose is to make sure that local parents can buy their powdered formula rather than trying to refuse or reject others from getting the powdered formula. So it seems that you are in agreement with the DP. As long as the Hong Kong parents can buy it, then you won't disallow others to buy it. Now, the placing of orders. The DP supports the use of such a tool, such a knife, in the short term, because it enables you to do something in the short term, so that within a short period of time, people would try to be obedient and voluntarily comply with your requirements.
However, if the system does not succeed and Hong Kong people cannot secure the baby formula, then there will be a lot of complaints and things will be chaotic, and then the policy will just go on. That is why at this juncture we support such a system, and so that maybe within half a year, now if you are keen to set up a central hotline, you can do it within a few weeks. But if you say half a year is not enough, then maybe within a year. However, if you cannot have a sunset clause, what does that mean? Some people say you do not have a crystal ball, but you don't need a crystal ball. If you cannot set up such a system within a year and you have wielded the knife for a year already, then the system should just go on. However, if there is a sunset clause, the administration will have to work doubly hard within the set time frame, and that there will certainly be a review. If you cannot complete your task, then you can renew the system and extend for another year. However, if you do not have the sunset clause, then whether this is just a temporary or short-term measure, maybe not. This may become permanent. So I think you have to reassure us that you take the initiative. It is better than for us to compel you to set up a system within a certain time frame. If you cannot do it, then we'll eventually be able to ask you why you have not succeeded within that time frame. Secretary, well, actually, I understand that Mr. Toh is trying to labor on a very meaningful point. However, if we proactively suggest a timetable, it may not be conducive to the setting up of a permanent system, because people will know that come that time, you might certainly have to revert to the old position. No, you can seek an extension. Well, I don't think you need a sunset mechanism to force the administration to do something, because I have already told you clearly that in the time to come we will very actively work with retailers and suppliers and improve the system from the 4-5 perspectives I told you about. But then all this will be premised on some kind of commercial behavior. The administration, of course, has operated the hotline, and that has achieved immediate effect. That is a central administrative act, but the rest will be commercial, and nothing can be made compulsory. If parents or citizens would like to join any ordering hotline, those must be voluntary. And there are many other factors having an impact on the development of this matter. So to me, setting a time frame may not be practical. I must beg your pardon, but this is my view. Next member, Alice Mack. But before that, well, I think you might like to declare an interest, Mr. James Toh, because your baby requires baby formula. You mean it? Okay, so I declare the interest. Thank you. Miss Alice Mack, I have nothing to declare. I don't know whether I have the opportunity to declare any interest. Your question, please. First, the FTU supports the amendment regulation. We must make sure there is adequate supply for Hong Kong babies, so the regulation will help them and we support it. But I like to say that, as the Secretary said, this problem is serious. It's not just in Yuen Long or the North District, But in an old estate in a very small pharmacy in Qingyi, there was no supply whatsoever of baby formula. The boss there was receiving calls the whole day long, replying to people that there was no baby formula. He was already very conscientious. He was not selling to suspected mainland or Hong Kong parallel traders. However, this is happening even to a small local pharmacy in Qingyi. And also within estates in Qingyi, the chain stores would see queues of parallel traders lining up to get baby formula, and they were actually having fights with the security guards. Therefore, we really have to tackle this fast. It's not just Hong Kong babies. To a certain extent, this has become a social order problem. I agree that this regulation should not be with us permanently. I believe there should be a review, but as to whether there is a sunset clause, I have reservation about that. Because if you have a sunset clause, you will mean that the regulation will be void after a year, for example, and the parallel traders will be able to scheme according to that kind of timetable. So I don't think you should stipulate a particular time frame. We understand the amendment targets mainlanders. Well, actually, no. We are targeting parallel traders who are upsetting the market order in Hong Kong. And they are depriving Hong Kong babies of powdered formula. So I think we should make these strict measures. However, in the interim, I hope the administration can do something about supply. Some members mentioned the retail spots, but maybe this is not where the problem is. In fact, the larger scale chain stores have been benefiting from the huge sale. The individual local stores have not really benefited. Of course, Hong Kong merchants would like to have more business, but the important thing is supply. You really have to concentrate on supply. If you talk about unfairness, what suppliers did to large chain stores and small pharmacies was unfair. Some were able to restock, others were not able to. And even if they were able to restock, they had to bundle the sales. And actually, there was one point that I could not understand. I could not come to grips with the logic of comparing ordering a pizza and ordering baby formula. So I don't understand what comparison there was. But anyway, the administration should look at supply, and this should not be made permanent, nor should there be a sunset clause, because if you set a timetable, parallel traders will just have the chance to scheme according to that timetable. And I'm actually worried about the shortage of manpower at the CNE, because suddenly you have to tackle much more work. Do you need more resources and manpower? I think Mr. Yu can take the question. I think most of what Ms. Mack said was her remark, and Mr. Yu, you can answer that question. Thank you, Chairman. To complement the implementation of the new regulation, we had done redeployment internally, and we have sent about 200 people to the checkpoints. This is to increase sample checks or random checks. We have done so at rail, land and ferry control points. And actually before people go to the border checkpoints, we have installed 14 X-ray machines at 9 control points, and different other machinery has also been set up. This would streamline the clearance action, and also it has been made more accurate. Yes, this is a new kind of work. It is a challenge to us, but we will keep watch of the situation closely, and we can always do redeployment if there is a need. Next one. Mr. Gary Fan. On the 4th of February at the security panel, the Neo-Democrats have asked the administration to amend 2 laws. One, Import-Export Ordinance, and the other one, Reserved Commodities Regulation. And indeed, the administration has chosen to amend the Import-Export Law, and the New Democrats would support it because we believe it is reasonable, legitimate, and lawful. We believe the regulation is totally in line with the basic law, and it does not flout the WTO GATT. The only thing which is not desirable is that you have not called these people smugglers. They are not just parallel traders. They are smugglers, and they have flouted mainland laws because there is a tariff or import duty on powdered formula on the mainland. If anyone makes use of free trade or free market in order to oppose to the regulation, we believe they do not have enough understanding of Hong Kong's laws and Hong Kong's history. Around about 1997 to 2003, the administration has made use of this law in order to regulate smuggling and parallel trading, whether it be refrigerators, air conditioners, television sets, or electronic goods, etc. Now, whether you worry that this will become permanent, I think this is an over-worry on your part, because given the external market and also electronic development, I believe this is the only way we can make use of to plug the loophole. The administration has the responsibility to ensure that there is baby formula for babies in Hong Kong. We are talking about shortage of food for our babies. Babies are not adults. They cannot eat hamburgers or rice with roasted pork. They need powdered formula. If there are people objecting to the regulation, I think they are being callous. I think they are only looking at profit. They are only looking at quantity instead of quality vis-à-vis tourism development. The question is, we have individual travelers coming to Hong Kong, and they are flooding Hong Kong. The whole root of the problem is that there is a toxic or contaminated milk produced on the mainland. If this is not tackled at the root, there would be more conflicts between the mainland and Hong Kong. I understand that this regulation would only tackle the symptoms of the problem. So I'd like to ask the Secretary, you are saying that we have to review our reception capacity. Also, we are seeing a shortage of the chicken pox vaccination, and also there are mainland mothers coming to crash gate at our A&E departments, and the number is rising. So, Secretary, when you do your review, what are your proposals to the administration? In the long term, do we want to put a limit on IVS? And also in the long term, do you want actually to do away with IVS? Secretary. We agree with Mr. Gary Fan that this is reasonable, legitimate, and lawful. In fact, we have made the same analysis based on the same justifications, but I can't agree totally what you said about IVS, individual visit scheme, because there are different parts to that scheme. We believe IVS has a positive effect on Hong Kong's economy and employment, and we must understand that some of the parallel traders are Hong Kongers. Therefore, we don't target IVS in this action. You mentioned two other examples. Now, of course, I have come to understand that there are experts commenting on these two issues. Chickenpox vaccination itself is not a drug to tackle an acute disease. It is preventive in nature, and if there is a shortage of supply now, we can allow time for the Department of Health, to talk to the suppliers in order to replenish the supply. And in fact, the shortage has to do with just one brand. People still have choice. In fact, some mainlanders have come to Hong Kong to receive vaccination, but it is not a kind of crazy fight for commodities. And as for mainland women, yes, there are more in February than in December and January, but we are only talking about a maximum of 30 or so. And we will analyze each case with the law enforcement agencies. And I think you have seen from the media that we have detected some cases. Some of them had fake marriages, some of them were overstayers, and some mainlanders would make use of fake marriages so as to show that they have a Hong Kong husband. But we are making use of interdepartmental efforts in order to crack these cases. And I don't believe that there will be a worsening of the situation. Mr. Lo Wai Kwok.
Today is International Women's Day. For us to start the work of the subcommittee, I think it is of special meaning. It also shows that we are taking care of the mothers who have to take care of their babies. But of course, fathers are also taking good care of the babies as well. For the for the mainland fathers and mothers, they've lost their confidence in the products in the mainland market. Even for the same brand of powdered formula, mainland parents would only have confidence in the Hong Kong versions or Hong Kong editions. There is an imbalance in the supply of powdered formula in the Hong Kong market. And to make sure that Hong Kong babies can lead a normal life, the Hong Kong government has come up with this special measure, and the Business and Professional Alliance is in support of this measure. And then for free trade, which is a principle that we uphold, for this limit, I think it should at most be temporary. As to whether there should be a sunset clause, we still have an open attitude. Even if we don't have a sunset clause, I just wonder whether the administration should give us a good idea, a clear idea. There's under what circumstances would this be relaxed or even removed? Hong Kong, as a WTO member, does have the duty to think in this direction. Yes, from time to time, there are export controls in certain cases among WTO members. I won't escalate the issue to a question of breaching the basic law. But then, to make sure that people have a clear idea about the future development, maybe the Secretary should fully explain about the future of the regulation. The BPA is of the view that the punishment is too harsh. On the one hand, the mainland netizens are not too aware of the severity of the problem in Hong Kong. When they first heard that people were thrown into jail, they were very surprised. I think a fine would suffice. So perhaps we should make adjustments to the penalties for a contravention, and I look forward to an explanation from the administration. As far as the supply of powdered formula is concerned, well, there is a legitimate channel. It is a departure from the normal business for you to have parallel trading of powdered formula in this way. Secretary, I'd like to thank Mr. Low for his questions. First of all, about the duration of the regulation. You are right in pointing out that for the WTO, JTT, it is suggested that you only introduce a control for as long as it is needed. The administration can assure you that we won't relax our work, that is talking to the suppliers and try to make sure that the supply will be adequate. In the meantime, we'll try to watch out for changes in the market which may affect the demand and supply in the powdered formula market. But then in this matter, it isn't just the government's act that can influence everything. We can't just introduce a visible hand and then resolve everything. I don't want to impose a deadline, but we'll be actively fine-tuning the mechanism. As I have said, if the Legislative Council wants us to come back to report to you about the progress, we'll be more than happy to do so at any time. We'll tie in with your requests. I'll be finishing quickly for the penalties for the import and export ordinance. Contravention covers different kinds of acts. A person may unknowingly exceed the limit. This is one scenario. We can't rule out another possibility of a larger scale smuggling. So the penalty here is the maximum, and the actual sentencing would depend on the specific circumstances. I hope you will have faith in our legal system and our judiciary. I think when the court decides on the penalty, the court will bear in mind the facts of the case and the seriousness of the offense. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To safeguard the interests of the local babies and make sure that their parents don't have to go around to grab the powdered formula, I think it is necessary to have this piece of regulation. I think we have the consensus that this shouldn't be something for the long term. However, to resolve the problem, it seems that it will take more than a short-term measure. So the FTU agrees that there should be a review mechanism so that we can agree on the circumstances that would be required before we can relax the rule. Some members have suggested that we should have a specified date in the regulation to act as a sunset clause. We do not favor such an idea, because we mustn't let the smugglers or the parallel traders to have an expected date to revive their activities. On the mainland, they have 16 million babies being born every year. In Hong Kong, we have at most 90,000. So for us to address the problem of demand and supply, the government must have a good idea and think carefully. The administration seems to say that after the supply has steadied, maybe there will be some relaxation. Instead of a 2-can limit, perhaps later on it will be changed to 3 cans or 4 cans. So I want to know whether the administration has already got something in mind. So does the administration have any detailed plan? If not, then why are you saying that one day we can have a gradual relaxation? And then for what's happening on the mainland. Now in Hong Kong, at most we can control the export. However, ultimately it's a matter of the quality of food on the mainland and the mainlanders' confidence in the food produced domestically. So is there anything that we can do to enhance their confidence in this regard so that the mainland citizens will source their goods domestically? Lastly, I want to ask this question. Recently, there are certain media reports saying that some travelers would carry the powdered formula in bags rather than in cans. Maybe it was done by the suppliers, or it might be done by the travelers for personal use. I just want to know whether this has deteriorated. I have been told that 5,000 cases have been identified. I want to know whether the problem has become worse. Secretary, let me clarify a point. Of course, we don't want this to become something which is permanent. But then, we haven't got any plans as to when we are going to withdraw it, or under what circumstances we are going to withdraw it. As I have said, we are now talking to the suppliers and retailers, order placing hotline, restocking, placing orders on a long-term basis. The work are the areas of work that we have been interested in. And for the mainland authorities, be it powdered formula and other kinds of food, I think the mainland authorities are also concerned about consumers' confidence. I'm sure in terms of the quality as well as the confidence, I think they will work on it. They are concerned about the quality as well as the safety of food supplied to Hong Kong. That is a very good mechanism, and we have an academic exchange mechanism to enhance their quality. And then as to the breaking up of the powdered formula into smaller quantities, well, I think only a small number of suppliers are offering the powdered formula in a format different from those contained in can. Well, I think people are very concerned about the quality of the powdered formula, and we understand that the integrity, the intactness of the packaging would be important, because the powdered formula may be subject to a number of factors, like they are quite vulnerable to a change in humidity. Mrs. Virginia Yip, well, the New People Party has been very concerned. The problem first started in 2010. The administration has said that they have been trying different ways. They even put in place a hotline because the supplies were not efficient. But then the government is going one way, suppliers are going another way. Miss Alice Mack said that even on Ching Island it's difficult to buy the powdered formula. But then we're talking about free market. When there is a demand, then it should be met with supply. Why should civil servants be asked to do this for them? Now, we know that sales will go up when there are more advertisements. So are you going to publicize the different brands on their behalf? Now, to make sure that they are not telling lies, to make sure that they really have an adequate supply, and to make sure that the prices won't be raised indiscriminately. Have you ever considered the reserved commodities ordinance? Rice, frozen meat, and poultry have been included in the past. Yes, we are eating less and less rice, but then there's a psychological effect, like the case of powdered formula. So despite the removal of those two other products, rice is still on the list of reserved commodities. So would you consider invoking that piece of legislation? So WTO's rules do not seem to encourage civil servants to help the suppliers. Well, for the government to intervene and for the civil servants to help to address the inadequacies of the supply chain, I think it is a reluctant move on our part. We have no other alternatives. So I agree that In the future, we'll be actively helping the suppliers and retailers to improve their sales network. It doesn't mean that we are doing the job for them, but we are just promoting the idea. We hope that we can coordinate it so that we can get to the results. When I answered Mr. James Toe's question, I'm not saying that the government is trying to give directives to them. And in fact, for the suppliers and retailers and even for individual citizens, I think everybody has a choice as to whether to join the sales network.
So the short answer is the administration wouldn't like to have to do this all the time, and that is civil servants and the administration have to do what the market should do. As for the reserved commodities regulations, I think Mrs. Ip knows that at a certain stage we indeed gave consideration to the feasibility of making use of that regulation, but then we eventually decided that as a major principle, the administration should try not to intervene as far as possible, and it is only in an ultimate final situation that we should intervene, and therefore we should go for the IE regulation because that is the lowest degree of intervention. So it is a very small, be it harsh measure. Is that right, that you are exercising constraint already? Well, I hope everybody understands that this is what we are doing. Chairman, I still have some time. I'd like to ask more questions. There are questions in the community. Why 2 cans? Why not 3, 4 cans? Why do you draw a line there? Will you relax it to 3 cans, 4 cans in the future? If yes, what will be the impact? Secondly, some people said that you should charge export duty, so you have money in the coffers and it is a deterrent as well. Do you think it's feasible? Do you think customs officers can charge duty according to the number of cans on a person? Secretary, I will try to answer the first question, and I'll defer to the Commissioner to answer the second question with regard to the charging of export duty. Whether it be 1, 2, 3, or 4 cans, in those few days, these figures were ringing in my head, and in fact we did give consideration to 3 cans. I dare not say that this is an exact science, but making use of common sense, we understand that we are talking about $200 for a can, and usually if parallel traders can carry a can, well, in fact they were able to get $50 or less for 1 can, but this time around it is now so difficult and they can get about $80 for a can. So if the figure is too big, then people would say that they would be able to carry small quantities. They would like to make more trips with smaller quantities, so they would still be able to make a profit. But if we put it at 2 cans, well, unless you really leave Hong Kong for a long time. Otherwise, 2 cans will be able to substantiate a baby for quite a long time. And maybe not just one adult would be traveling together with a baby. So we hope that this will take care of families which really need the powdered formula for their baby when they leave Hong Kong. So on the one hand, we increase the cost of parallel trading, and at the same time, we like to minimize the volume that they can carry away from Hong Kong. Export duty, Commissioner? Commissioner. Well, I should put it this way. I wouldn't like to make use of that measure. Is it that if it is export duty, you will have to charge it for people going to everywhere in the world? Well, even now, we don't target the mainland. We target everybody who leaves Hong Kong. Now, I don't know whether there are other policy perspectives, but from my own perspective, I would think that we should not make use of such a measure, because we don't usually charge export duties. And is it feasible that customs officers also act as cashiers to charge the export duty on the number of cans carried away from Hong Kong? Powdered formula is not included in the dutiable commodities ordinance. If powdered formula is included, we have to look at whether our checkpoints can take up the workload. if the mainland is a big market and there is a big demand and people are willing to pay the duty, then at Lowu and other checkpoints, and every day we are talking about a people flow of 270,000 trips. If everybody has to line up and pay duty, well, is that going to be feasible? What about our clearance capacity? Mrs. Ip, I think you should know this very well. You were responsible for such work in the past. Dr. Koh, let me add. I am not really an expert in this, but very often, if you pay duty, it is because you apply for an export license and you export a big volume. But if it is goods carried on the person, usually we don't want to charge duty. Rather, we want to limit the quantity that people can carry. Therefore, if you impose such a duty, and if the customs officers would have to gather duty from every person, from every traveler, it is not very practical. Can I ask Mr. Yu a very simple question? Very often, parallel traders make use of checkpoints at Lowu and Huanggang. What about our peers and the airport? Is it that you also impose the control? Yes. When we step up export control this time around, we are doing it at all land, rail, and ferry control points. We are increasing our random checks. Next one, Paul Chair. Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. In fact, you have taken words out of my mouth. We are tackling the checkpoint at Shenzhen, and particularly travelers going in and out of Hong Kong around the Lunar New Year. What we have done goes to show that you are not really tackling the problem head-on. Mrs. Ip was talking about whether this is a small, harsh measure, not a big one, but I would say that this is a foolish measure. If you look at the if you look at the relevant regulation, now, I don't know why some people say if we do not support it, we are not being reasonable or fair, that we are careless and we don't understand the law. If I should look at the relevant regulation, what kind of commodities we are talking about? Mostly they are toxic Chinese proprietary medicine, or they are prohibited commodities, or they are textile goods, or unprocessed diamond. However, we are just talking about baby formula, and yet you are so strict, and also the export control applies to people going to all places in the world. So I would not agree with what the DOJ representative said, that this is not going to be against the basic law, that whether it is fair, reasonable, or proportional. What is important is, as Dr. Koh was saying, that this is a critical commodity. But actually, no. You should be talking about a critical measure. In other words, if you want to know whether you have gone overboard with regard to your measure, you have to see whether it is a critical measure, that you must have it. Some brands have mounted advertising campaigns, and people are thinking that if you use this baby formula, your babies would be so much more cleverer. And it seems that these baby formula have a higher value than other brands. Dr. Koh, you're a doctor. You should know this better than other people, that even if they are different brands, the composition of baby formula will be the same and the nutritional value should be the same, except the contaminated ones. It doesn't mean that you have to consume one or two brands before you have the nutrition. Just like soft drinks, you don't have to go for Coca-Cola in order to enjoy a cola drink. You can go for other colas. And even people in southern China are thinking, or led to think and believe, that that was the only choice. I think people have been fooled. You have to educate the public so as to suppress the demand for one or two particular brands. You are not really tackling the problem. However, you have gone down a route that damages Hong Kong's free market and our important principle of free trade for over 100 years. And no, it is not just Article 115. Now, if there are people attacking our financial market on a major scale, does it mean that you can go by the same principle in 11 or Article 113 or 112? You have talked about the outflow of capital, and also 115 does not only talk about goods, it also includes intangible assets and capital. So if in the case of a war, in case of a famine, we can understand, but this is not the case. This is just a run on a particular commodity. You do not seek to educate the public who can become more clever, but in fact you have sought to damage your most important principle of free trade. If you open this opening, and next time it will be Coca-Cola or diapers and any other commodities. Hong Kong is so close to the mainland. If people want to start a run on a certain commodity, it can affect any products. And when will your job end? Just now the DOJ representative said that this would be limited to baby formula for people under 36 months. Now, I'm not an expert. Do people over 36 months also consume powdered formula? And you also say you only limit the quantity. Now, if it is for a reasonable use, then we can understand. But what about the suppliers? Trade to the suppliers. The limit on quantity is not reasonable. And you also say that the supply is particularly short, so you have to have this measure. But no, this is going to be there forever because you do not know when the regulation will expire. So I would think that you actually flout the basic law. You need to have a reasonable and proportional measure. I am not Gary Fan. I don't have a strong legal background as he does. He says that this is fair, legitimate, and lawful. I admit that I do not know the law well. But if we want to persevere and preserve our important cornerstones of free trade and the basic law, I think this is foolish. Dr. Koh, let me try to reply. Mr. Paul Chair talked about outflow of capital. I don't know. I am not in the financial services. Well, this is just one or two articles before Article 115. So, well, anyway, I'm not knowledgeable enough to discuss with you. Now, coming to critical commodities, yes, it is our judgment. I do agree that in most circumstances, different brands of baby formula are the same, but we are talking about some babies who, for objective reasons, cannot benefit from breastfeeding, and so this will become a critical food stuff for them. And well, are you saying that yes or no, that people can change brands of baby formula? Well, yes. I was saying actually that the shortage of supply can affect this brand or another brand. You can tackle one brand, but then the shortage of supply can also affect another brand. But it doesn't harm people's health. Is that right? No, I'm saying that this phenomenon can extend to another area, and that is the shortage of supply can also spread to other brands. And when you talk about cola is not a critical or a necessary commodity. And in fact, we allow people to apply for an export license if they are legitimate export and re-export merchants. They will not be affected because there is a license system. As for the run, it is not just people mounting a run on a certain commodity. It is not just a run because this has happened time and again. And as to publicity, is it that we have done nothing? No, we have the Hong Kong Code, which is under consultation. This has come to LegCo for discussion. If there is over-aggressive advertisement, we will have to tackle it. I only have 10 seconds. Will the administration also give their legal expert view as to whether we are flouting the basic law? Because a member has said that this doesn't go against the basic law. Can we have some views? Yes, please. Mr. Raymond Chan, I support the amendment. Whether this is clever or foolish, or whether it will be effective, we do not know. This is immature to judge or predict. of course, we should have a regular review, but as to whether we should wait only when we have a clever or smart way to do it, we would be criticized of discussing without making a decision. Some people may think this is not the best, that this is not clever. Well, it is up to you to propose something cleverer and something better. You should not just require the administration to come up with the best option, because if that's the case, we will have to wait on end. But I think there is already an immediate effect, and that is this issue has gone to the NPC and CPPCC plenaries in Beijing, that in fact their attention is drawn to the quality of powdered milk in the mainland. If there is not a problem with the quality of powdered formula on the mainland, there would not be parallel trading problems in Hong Kong. I think the SALG has acted in a proactive manner and has done what is within our capacity to do it, and we have tried to do our best.
個宣傳嘅問題，因為
I want to ask a question about publicity. Well, recently we have seen a number of cases. It seems that they weren't genuine parallel traders. They said that they didn't know about it and they had just exceeded the limits. So what about your publicity work? I think there is some misunderstanding on the part of the mainland media. Mr. Chen, sorry. I would like to use my power as the chair to extend the meeting by 15 minutes. I think the conflict between mainland and Hong Kong is sort of aggravated. Dr. Kong, if I may answer the second part of the question, and then Mr. Yu will answer the first question. First of all, our work on the mainland. When we first launched the initiative, indeed it is true to say that we didn't focus our efforts on communication with the mainland. Now that we have done a lot of work at various levels, we are now having better communication with the mainland, both with the mainland authorities as well as the media on the mainland. I myself have been interviewed many times, and I hope that the mainlanders can understand the nature of the regulation and the justification for doing this. As to the actual publicity, maybe Mr. Yu can elaborate. Mr. Yu, I think I've already said that at the crossing points with slogans, APIs, leaflets, and posters, and then on the mainland itself, through the mainland customs, we have been publicizing the new arrangements. And then the Hong Kong Tourism Board, whose website is seen by or visited by mainlanders, will also carry the same publicity message. Now, if somebody is still bringing out more powdered formula than allowed, does it mean that we need to do more by way of publicity? There were 151 cases, and the number is changing. In the first day or two, there were people exceeding the limit by 8 or 10 cans. Now, for the past day or two, we had people returning and buying the powdered formula again and again within the 24-hour limit. So they came and had the baby formula for the second time or third time. We have will only stop those that are genuine parallel traders, and we have counted on the plainclothes officers to gather the intelligence for us. Now, I just wondered if either Dr. Koh or Mr. Low can assist us here. We want to be more accurate about the volume of powdered formula being imported into Hong Kong. Is it 20 million or 40 million kg? What is the volume of the shipment? What is the volume of import? And then for newborn babies in Hong Kong, what is the yearly consumption? Mr. Chairman, well, last year, in 2012, between January and November, for the amount imported, we had 14 million kgs powdered formula. For re-export, 2.2 million kg. In other words, 37 to 38 million kg was left. But it isn't just for local babies. This is because when we compared what happened in 2008, well, in fact, at that time, the amount imported was 15 million kg. Transshipment, again, around 2 million kg. In other words, for those left in the local market, it was only 13 million kg. But at the same time, the birth rate has only seen an increase of 10% or so. So I don't think we can actually consume all the extra powdered formula left in the market of Hong Kong. So with reason to believe that a large amount of powdered formula has been diverted from the market of Hong Kong. Dr. Koh, I'm afraid we cannot answer one of the questions that you asked. That is, how much is actually being consumed locally. But then from the figures, you can see that between 2008 and now, the increase in the birth rate is only of a limited degree. But then the total amount imported has increased from 15 million to 40 million kg. In other words, the total amount of imports has been doubled by more than 2 times. But at the same time, we have only seen an increase of the birth rate by doubling it also. So our judgment is that at the retail level, a lot of powdered formula has been diverted out of the market of Hong Kong. All right, next item. Mr. Vincent Fang has tabled a letter. He's suggesting that the subcommittee should listen to the views of the deputations. But then the Food Safety and Environmental Hygiene Panel on the 4th of February this year held a special meeting on measures to steady the supply of powdered formula. They have already invited deputations. 12 organizations came, including the suppliers as well as the relevant groups. They attended the particular panel meeting. So if the subcommittee is to issue an invitation again, I'm afraid that we will be having the same group of deputations coming. Now today at our meeting, I think almost all of you are in support of the amendment regulation. 2 members might be holding somewhat different views, Zhong Guokban and Paul Che. For others who spoke across the political spectrum, it seems that you incline towards supporting the amendment regulation. Today with 16 or 17 members who spoke, 15 are in support. So in order to be more efficient, perhaps we can be sort of more efficient about the listening of views from the deputations. No, I don't think you should go for expediency. I hope I'm not getting the impression that you try to sacrifice the public hearing just because a few members spoke against it. As to the earlier panel meeting, I'm not too sure whether it is about this particular measure or whether it was simply about the shortage of powdered formula. Shortage of supply was indeed a problem, but I think you're using poison to cure a disease. I just wonder whether members would agree that we should resort to such draconian measures. I think we need to give the public an opportunity to speak their mind. Well, not too many members are still with us. We have over 20 members on the membership list. I just wonder whether we can invite the relevant organizations to provide written submissions to us as much as possible. Or do you really insist on having a public hearing? This will mean we are dragging on, and then, and in fact, the media have reacted strongly to this issue. The issue has been discussed thoroughly both in the media and at this meeting. Is it really necessary to have a public hearing? And we would simply be hearing the same arguments said today. Can I ask the Secretary to ask the relevant deputations to give us written submissions as much as possible? Can I do that? I hope that it isn't just a fight between you and me. My idea is that even if the majority asks for something to be done, we'll still respect the minority's voice. Say, for example, when it comes to the setting up of a subcommittee, the regulation has already come into operation. Here, we are simply exercising our monitoring role. I find it strange. Now, the Civic Party says that it's exceptional. The administration has rendered it effective before coming to the LegCo, and usually it will be regarded as a last resort for a critical situation. Now, if you simply want to hurry it through, since it has been introduced before being scrutinized by us, we need to exercise even greater care. Otherwise, we are setting a precedent so that in the future, everything will be introduced first before discussing the matter with us. I hope the Civic Party won't, as a result of the precedent case of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, try to adopt another approach. I don't want to be involved in another debate. The Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge is something else. Well, since the Civic Party has been mentioned, so Anna Leong, I just can't see. Perhaps I don't have the wisdom that Paul Chair has. He won't give up any opportunity to smear his political enemies. It is not unexpected, but I am sure that this is totally unrelated. It is superfluous. But then, Chair, as you have said, there aren't too many members left. If you ask for my opinion, the focus this time is a bit different from the focus of the FSEH panel meeting. On that occasion, we were concerned about a shortage of supply, and we asked the suppliers as well as the chair of the pharmacies to comment on that. Now, if you will propose a public hearing, I won't be standing in the way. I won't prevent it from happening. Earlier on, myself and Dennis Kwok asked our questions, and they've been answered by the Secretary. We believe that so far the Secretary's replies are convincing, and it's up to us to listen to other views. So I won't object to the public hearings proposal, so please have it recorded in the minutes. So shall we decide on having a public hearing? Gary Fan, Raymond Chen, what do you think? And let's decide on extending the scrutiny period. Yes, if we want to extend the scrutiny period, to make sure that there will be sufficient time for us to scrutinize the amendment regulation, we'd like to extend the scrutiny period till the 17th of April. On the 27th of March, at a meeting of the LegCo, we are going to move a motion. So when extended, the deadline will be the 17th of April, and 10th of April will be the deadline for giving notice of amendment. 22nd of March will be the deadline to report to the House Committee. Well, I think we do have a very tight timetable. You're looking in my way. I think I'm not standing in the way. Alan Leung said that he's not a tiger standing in the way. I would simply say that I'm not a dog standing in the way. I don't think we can afford to resume our scrutiny after they finish with their meetings in Beijing, the CPPCC and the NPC meetings. Even if we have to run late, we can't help. But I don't think we should do anything extra just because others are in Beijing. So 13th of March, 10:45 public hearing. Our third meeting, 14th of March, 2:30, so that we have the cross scrutiny.
We'll inform other members in a written manner. Okay, that's all for the meeting today. And we'll extend the scrutiny period to the 17th of April. We'll report that to the House Committee. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.